What's up, what's up? It's time for Done Way Past Funny with your host, G.D. Fenderson. Join us as we discuss the art, science, and business of comedy with comedians and comedian adjacent. With this episode's guest, Alan Katz. It's time to get down and get dope with Done Way Past Funny. Hi, I'm G.D. Fenderson, certified forensic humorist and host of Done Way Past Funny. Thank you for joining us as we continue our interview with Hollywood writer and producer Alan Katz. Enjoy. Now, what I'm thinking is because people don't realize that when you're writing levity for a script, it's very important to not just have a funny line, but to have a funny line in context of what that character would say. Because you could have a great line, but if you're trying to if you have a character and that character would never say that line, no matter how funny it is, it's going to be out of place. At least that's of course, I've never made any movies, and you've made no matter how many you've made that many more than I've made.
I would say consider this from the other perspective. What about the other actors? Now, they're not improvising and they're working from the script. So where do I come in? Where's my cue here? And so you kind of Dennis put everyone else on tenterhooks because that's not how everyone else is working. It's really hard when one person is improvising. Now, it's funny in this podcast that I'm doing here, as opposed to your podcast, what you're doing here in the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. Back when I told the original story of the making of Bordeaux of Blood, one of the people who very kindly agreed to speak to me, and I'm going to go up on her name right now. Jean I think was her first name, was the script supervisor.
Okay.
And Jean had the very, very, very hard job of having to scribble down everything that Dennis was saying because we needed it for the cut. We needed to have written down everything that he said just for the editor so we could decide which cut, because if we do multiple cuts and he says different things in different cuts, that's got to be memorialized somewhere. Otherwise, it will be chaos in the editing room. Wait, where did this line of dialogue appear in the script?
Right.
You can't do it this way. It was chaos. And so one of her jobs was suddenly to, while she's also timing the script and making sure all the other actors are getting their lines correctly, she's scribbling all his new imagined on the spot stuff in the margins of the script, and then sticky notes and sticky notes on top of sticky notes on top of sticky notes. It's terrible. Now, she told a story. She had done Jumanji. She had been the script soup on Jumanji. Robin Williams.
Right.
Now, Robin Williams, notorious a guy for improvising, just taking a thought and going where it went. He had that kind of amazing mind that could do that kind of stuff. And she told a fascinating story that yes, on that very first take, he'd improvise all over the place, and she scribbled like crazy. But on the second take and the third and the fourth and the fifth, he did those improvs to the letter.
Right.
All those improvs, even though he had created them, he could reproduce them. Reproduce them. Holy fucking shit. What a mind.
And the way I can tell you how that's done, because a lot of people think improv is he just grasping things out of the air, but it's more like a library. A good improv artist has a library, and what it is, he's not just writing new books. He's actually grabbing a book off the shelf, opening a page, using it, and then he can turn back to it. He's not writing new books for the most part. These books have already been written, and he's just grabbing one, reading a line, putting it back, which is why he can reproduce it.
And it's the tremendous, yes, and it's appreciated, but it's the quickness. He's lining them up just so, and remembering the order in which he put them in this particular sequence.
Yes,
that is still a fantastically, as disorganized as it seems on the outside.
Right.
The organization on the inside is staggering. Remember the scene at the end of Indiana Jones and the first Indiana Jones movie, that vast library of stuff, except it's all cataloged. Yeah. And people know exactly he knows exactly where everything is. Oh, when I was young and beginning to appreciate film criticism, and I became a fan of the New Yorker.
Hmm.
Their main critic, oh, I'm going up on names. Who's bad with names? Very, 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 very famous movie critic. Fuck. When she would write a film criticism, and I'm going to drop her name in here. When she would write a film criticism, she would refer to all the movies it reminded her of.
Right.
And so you got the feeling that she'd arrive at the movie theater with baggage, and she sat there in the with the tub of popcorn on her lap, but her legs were up, sitting atop all the baggage that she brought into the movie theater with her. All the movies that seems to, in her mind, could have inspired the director, or that it simply reminded her of.
Right.
And wow. But it's that kind of mind where all these things, every last bit of information and story that you've heard, it becomes grist for the mill that is you.
Now, I want to take you back to 1985 when you first arrived in Hollywood. When you arrived in Hollywood in 1985, you, if I remember correctly, you had a comedy script with you. Whatever became of it, and what was it about? Did anything ever become of it?
No, it's funny. I had written. I was in New York. I was a drama major at Vassar, and the theater in New York was where I thought my future lay. After graduating Vassar, I thought I was going to be an actor. I went to one audition. I was awful. It was for a Shakespearean part. I was so unprepared for that. And I walked out of that audition. And I thought, I am not going to subject myself to this. What kind of asshole makes their money like this? I'm going to go be a writer instead. Bigger asshole at the end of the day. And I vowed to myself, I would not act again until someone asked me nicely. And which is exactly what happened. The couple of times I've acted is because director friends have asked me nicely. I'm in an episode of Tales from the Crypt. The Whirlpool episode that Mick Garris directed. Mm-hmm. And he asked me nicely because Mick is very much into stunt casting.
Okay.
Mick loves stunt casting. And
what is stunt casting?
Casting you wouldn't expect, outside the box casting.
Okay.
Idea. So the Whirlpool story took place in the comic book world in the 50s, where it was written for guys. This was 30 years ago. It was a more male-centric world. So we didn't have to populate a world with women characters just to make everyone feel good. Or we were describing the world that we all came from, for better or worse.
Right.
And so it was written for a male writer and the male editor. And Mick had a good idea to cast one of them as a female, just to spice it up. And he cast, God damn, I'm going up on names today. Fuck me, that's terrible. I'm going up on names today. Well, all the names are just evaporating in my head. Rita Rudner. Thank you.
Okay.
So he wanted Rita Rudner and Richard Lewis.
Okay.
Now, all right. So already, we're a little outside the box here, but he wanted Rita Rudner to play the comic book artist.
Okay.
And Richard to be the editor. Now, okay. That then created a character, Rita, who is an anachronism. She's a living anachronism. She's a woman wouldn't, if she's a woman doing that in this particular time period, that's a story unto itself. I kind of want to tell that story. Why are we not asking that question? Wait. She seems so, how is that everyone else is male? And they're all
if
acting
if it's not explained,
yes,
it's
right.
Yeah.
Right. They're all acting like she belongs there. And that just, I don't know, something inside me just bumps on that. Like, well, why aren't we addressing that? This is because this is just a casting choice. that we're all going along with. And okay, that's okay. But hey, if this member of the audience is stepping outside of it, maybe other people in the audience could be stepping outside of it.
Right.
That's not a good sign if I'm stepping outside. Well, Mick knew that when he had done that casting that I was not happy. And we never had a conversation about it. I guess Gil told him, because when Gil told me what it was, I guess I threw a little bit of a temper tantrum. And I said, what the fuck? Why didn't you ask me? How could you fucking do that? And I guess Gil conveyed that as gently as he could to Mick. And Mick, they didn't change the casting. It was way too late. We'd already made a deal with Rita. Mick said, hey, the part of Iggy? Maybe that should be you, man. And I recognized the peace offering for what it was. And I said, thank you, I'll do it. And so he asked me very, very nicely, but there was a reason. There was a caveat as to why he asked me nicely. Now, Glenn.
Yeah.
Remind me where you grew up.
Baltimore.
Yeah. You're also from, what part of Baltimore did you grow up, Glenn?
Okay. Now, I grew up in Northwest Baltimore. And as a matter of fact, I have to ask you this because right across the street from me, at the corner of Airedale and Borman Avenue, there was a little store called Katz Groceries. And
no relation. No okay. Relation.
Damn, that's a shame because
I'm sorry to break your heart.
Well, it's just that she taught me one of the most important lessons of my life as a child. And it was just one of those things that she was such a great woman, such a wonderful person. And she, I learned so much from being around her and her husband, and I was hoping there was some kind of connection. It doesn't show the memory whatsoever.
What part of town did you grow up?
Northwest Baltimore, and I was surrounded by Cold Spring, Garrison Boulevard, Liberty Heights, and Dolefield. So there's a street called Airedale, and right between Borman and Bell Avenue. For people who really know Baltimore, that's really nitty gritty.
And the store was called Katz Grocery?
Yeah, Katz, Katz Grocery.
Yeah, they never owned a place with their name. But the irony is my uncle Horace was a grocer.
Okay.
So he was in that business, but they had a store closer to the downtown area. It was further in.
Okay. Now, did you live in the Pikesville area?
Yeah, I grew up off Stevenson Road.
Okay. Yeah.
In the Pikesville area. Yeah, no, that was it. I went to Pikesville Senior High School.
Okay.
Which is 90%, at least it was when I was going, it was 90% Jewish.
Right.
And so even on the Jewish holidays, everybody took off because you knew no one was going to be there. Nobody. Our football team everyone loved to play us because, hey, Jews don't play, yeah, Jews might play football, but hey, the teams across town.
Yeah.
Oh my God, but they would love to beat the fucking shit out of us. And they did. Yeah, I went to Pikesville, and I could not wait to get the fuck out of Baltimore. I went to school in New York. I went to Vassar, and I thought I was going to be in the theater in New York. And then my friend from school, Carol Yumkis, had become an agent of William Morris in Los Angeles. And she said, you should write a screenplay. Because I was, after college, I went to that one audition. I thought I'm going to be a writer instead. So I wrote and produced training films, industrial films, little publicity pieces. I had a couple of small clients. And I had some friends back in Baltimore because I had worked for a guy named Vince Clues, who was, he wrote and produced training films and things like that. And I'd done some writing for him and been a production assistant for him. And I'd met one of his directors, was a guy named Steve Yeager.
Steve Yeager, yeah. He worked with John Waters.
Yeah. So Steve, Steve was a really, really good friend. I had And Steve always aspired to break out of Baltimore and be in the movie business. And so Steve and I talked about a movie project together, and that kind of evolved into this thing that I wrote called Down to Earth, which was about a Howard Stern-like disc jockey who has a guest who he kind of rails on, and the guest, it turns out, is about aliens. And suddenly this kid who calls but about a kid who calls the disc jockey, and the kid ends up discovering that the aliens are actually here, and that guy was right. And I wrote that, and Steve and I, Steve wanted to direct it, and so that was kind of how we were going to try to pull it together. But I sent that to Carol, and Carol said, "This is great. You come out and meet and greet people." So June 1985, I flew out for a week to meet and greet people in Los Angeles. Now, to me, a New Yorker, East Coast person, but New Yorker, a burgeoning, was not a real New Yorker, but a burgeoning New Yorker. To me, LA was the stupidest place on the planet. So fucking, it's just the land of the avocado head.
Yeah.
Just stupid. And I flew out. Well, okay. You know what it's like in June on the East Coast. It's hot. It's humid. In New York, every place smelled like piss. In LA, it's the desert, and it's dry, and hey, the weather's beautiful. That's why people move out here. And 40 years ago, in 1985, 40 years ago, it was a lot less crowded than it is now. You get around place A to place B a lot more quickly than you do now, but it was great. And wow, people were so nice to me. I highly recommend having copious amounts of smoke blown up your ass. It's a very pleasurable experience. They were great to me and saying great things about my writing and my script. And one evening, Carol took me to a film premiere, St. Elmo's Fire. And they represented the movie. So it was a backstage part of that experience. It was very heady stuff to witness. And the next morning I didn't have any meetings, and someone had suggested I take a drive through Topanga Canyon. And 40 years ago, Topanga Canyon, which is a lovely, beautiful, kind of wild part of LA inside the city limits, 40 years ago was a lot. These days it's overbuilt. It's people live there. Right. Then that was not the case, and it was beautiful driving from the 101, the freeway, through the Santa Monica Mountains as they plunged toward the Pacific Ocean. By the time I got to Pacific Coast Highway, it was done. LA had completely seduced me. Fuck New York, man. I wanted to live in that shithole. Suddenly, and the next month, I moved out, and I became an Angelino and found myself in the movie business.
Now, when you started the movie business, because there was another Alan Katz, Allan Katz. Yeah. Now, how long did it take for you to get out from under his shadow and establish your own name? Because for a while you were being mistaken for that Alan Katz, and some of your meetings you got were because of that other guy. How long did it take for it to be so that you, one L Allen, was out from under the shadow of two L Allen?
The better question should be, when did you figure out to just admit to say you were him and let the meeting go on?
Let me redo this. When did you figure out that you should just pretend to be him, let them think you're him, and let the meeting go on?
I think it was the third set of people staring back at me like, wait, you're not Allan Katz, you're Allan Katz. Why did we set up a meeting with you? We wanted to talk to that guy. And so after the third time, I finally got wise. And when they said, because that at the time I was pitching this other idea I had called French Kiss, which was about an arranged marriage. The other Alan Katz had a script going around town that people really liked called The Hunchback of UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And people really, really loved the script. And so meetings would begin with, "Oh, we're so glad to meet you. We really love The Hunchback of UCLA." And like I said, the first 3 times I would say, "Oh, it's not me, it's the other Alan Katz." and they'd look at me and they'd roll their eyes. And then the 4th time I finally said, "Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Well, if you like that, You're gonna love what I'm about to pitch you right now. And I'd start singing and dancing, while I had them while they were thinking I was someone else. You know, if they like this pitch, we'll clean up the mess later. It was that kind of thinking. But yes, I slowly began to understand how to operate in this town and in this business. It's smoke and mirrors, friend. Understand it.
Now, when you wrote for I'm gonna go back to because I was a huge fan of the Tales from the Crypt, the Crypt Keeper in particular. If the whole show was just the Crypt Keeper, I would have been happy. I didn't even need the rest of the show. I was happy with just the Crypt Keeper himself. But my understanding is that the inspiration for the Crypt Keeper was Groucho Marx in a way, but the words was like almost like a emoting what was you basically.
Well, let's take the whole process back a couple of steps. The
Okay.
creation of the character itself, it happened in a somewhat convoluted way because the Tales from the Crypt TV show did not go through a normal development process.
Okay.
Back when Tales from the Crypt first started in the early 1990s, film and TV were two very different spaces. It's not anything like it is today, where talent can travel freely back and forth between the two, and it's perfectly acceptable. Back then, that did not happen at all. Film was one thing, TV was another, and the occasional Tom Hanks or Robin Williams would go from TV into film, but if you were going from film into TV, your career was done.
Right.
So these were two vastly different worlds. And HBO was all movies at the time. They were dipping their toe into original programming with shows like Dream On and First and 10. But these were basically just ordinary single camera shows with tits and the word fuck. That's really what differentiated them. Otherwise, really, they could have been on other networks, really, regular networks. Then you get these four mega producers: Joel Silver,
Right.
Richard Donner, The Omen, Superman Returns, Bob Zemeckis, Walter Hill. And they say to HBO, we want to put feature film vision inside little TV box. And HBO jumps up and down and says, yeah, great, do it. And the executive producers go right to work writing episodes. The show never went through a development process where someone said, all right, so what's an episode going to be every week? Well, what is it going to be? And the franchise was the EC Comics.
Right.
And so you normally, if you went through a development process, you'd hire a showrunner because someone's going to have to be responsible for taking the franchise, which is everything that's redolent of the EC Comics that makes them the EC Comics, that the thing that the executive producers love so much. All right, how do you embed that inside every frame of every episode?
Right.
Because that's part of the job of making a TV series. What the audience is going for in a TV show is the same thing every single week. They want that fix. It's like a heroin fix every week. Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. And certain things have to be there, or wait, well, why was that missing this week? The characters have to be characters they want in their living room.
Right.
Every week. Well, no one ever no development process, so no one was hired to be responsible for making sure the franchise is there in every episode. Well, the first couple episodes, everyone kind of knew what it was, and so you didn't need someone in place necessarily. But also, no one developed the Crypt Keeper. But we'll come back to that. The executive producers, because they weren't doing it well, they weren't in the TV business. They didn't understand how the TV business works. And even at that point at HBO, because they really weren't in the TV business, there was no model. Up to that point, the model for the TV business is shows, in order for a show to be profitable, it needs to get syndication. To get the syndication, it needs to make 65 episodes. So every idea for a TV show has to be repeatable at least 65 times to get into syndication. So shows, to get to 65, you're going to need a deficit partner. You need someone to help pay, because the first time that it runs, the second time that it runs, whoever's showing it, NBC, ABC, whatever they pay that first time, it's not going to cover the cost of production unless you're doing it really on the cheap, in which case they wouldn't have it on their air.
Right.
So yeah, you're to get the 65, it's going to have to look good. You're going to have to hire someone to cover the overages, the true cost of production. Well, the 4 executive producers of Tales from the Crypt never did any such thing. And they just went right to work making episodes, writing scripts, and spending money. And so HBO covered. They were the deficit partner, though not by choice.
Right.
Well, the first season was 6 episodes. The second season was 18 episodes. At the end of the second season and the night before the wrap party, literally HBO handed the executive producers a financial statement. Now, there was still a third and final season. That was the order, 2 seasons after the first. And so they were waiting for the third and final season that they were supposed to do. And the HBO said to the executive producers, guys, you owe us $1 million cash. If you want to see a season 3, you're going to pay us $1 million right now. Get out your checkbooks. And there's way more money coming by doing a season 3. So yeah, it made sense to get out their checkbooks. And so they canceled the wrap party. They fired everybody, and they wrote checks to HBO, the executive producers, for $1 million, which they then took out of the next year's budget and got their money back. But they fired everybody. And so they hired my partner at the time, Gil Adler, and I to take over running the show. They hired Gil. HBO wanted Gil because Gil is a very good producer. He came out of the theater in New York, and he's a comedy guy. But
Right.
Gil also trained as an accountant. And so he understands that if you have $1 to spend on your movie or TV show, don't spend $1 you haven't got it. If you can do it for, 99 cents or 98 cents, still make it look like $1, that's even better. Or make that 98 cent, what you spent, make look like $1.02 or $1.03, $1.04. And so the creative process is all problem solving. It's
Right.
really what it is. We're always solving a problem. And the solution to the problem from Gil's producerial perspective was don't throw money at it, throw more creativity at it. And so that's how Gil worked. And Gil had been brought in by HBO to solve a problem on a show called Vietnam War Stories, which was in the shitter. And Gil solved the money and schedule problems, brought the show in, and it won awards. And so when at the end of season 2 of Tales from the Crypt, HBO had another problem on its hands with a bunch of producers who didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They wanted Gil to at least see the show out, the third and final season, see the show out with some responsible money management. Since I was Gil's writing partner, we had worked on Freddy's Nightmares together. We had written a couple of screenplays that never got made together, but we've been writing partners for a couple of years. Gil said, I want Alan to be the story editor, the guy who is responsible for, overseeing all the writing on the script, on the show. And HBO didn't care because no one had that job before. It was neither here nor there to them. And so HBO was cool. And eventually Barry Josephson and Joel signed off because they wanted Gil. And so I was the ride along. Now, my job was to put the franchise inside every single frame. Was to make sure that the franchise, the EC Comics, was stamped on every single page of the script in some way. So yeah, all right, I was the showrunner. My other job was to write Crypt Keeper segments. Right. And I bumped into the other problem that I mentioned, the fact that the Crypt Keeper never got developed as a character. When those first 24 episodes, 6 in the first season, 18 the second season, whoever wrote the script would just throw lines at the Crypt Keeper. No one ever asked the question, okay, but who is he?
Right.
No development of the character whatsoever. And so as I sat down just to do my damn job, I had a problem. It's like the dentist, my problem writing for Bordello of Blood. I had a character that didn't exist. And all right, fortunately for the Crypt Keeper, I was able to create something. Now,
this
is where Groucho steps into the picture.
Okay, but for the benefit of people who aren't familiar with the EC Comics, the Crypt Keeper in the comic book was like an elderly white guy, I think.
Old white guy with stringy white hair.
Right.
When the executive producers went to create the Crypt Keeper for their TV series, they wanted to create something different. And Joel found Kevin Yeager. Joel Silver bumped into Kevin Yeager at the warehouse that Joel was keeping stuff, and that Kevin was keeping a bunch of stuff, and they began talking, and Kevin developed the Crypt Keeper puppet. And then Kevin found John Kassir, who became the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And so you had a great puppet, you had a great voice, but because no one had developed the character, there were just dialogue that the Crypt Keeper said. There was no cohesive character.
Right.
And so in order to do my job, I had to create a character just so I could write him, because I don't know how you write a cipher. It's impossible. I grew up loving old movies. I was a huge fan of the Marx Brothers. I loved Groucho, the wordplay. Groucho,
Yes.
the first one, and I want to ask you where your comedy roots come from, and we will come to that. The first time I ever saw Groucho viewing, WJZ at 4:00 in the afternoons used to run old movies, and they would run Marx Brother movies, W.C. Fields movies, and the first one I ever saw was Horse Feathers. And watching Groucho sing as Professor Quincy Adams Wagstaff, whatever it is, I'm against it. As a mouthy 10-year-old, I got it. And that's what I wanted to be. And I began to emulate Groucho. And, well, the Crypt Keeper became my little Groucho. And I had to fill the Crypt Keeper with a personality, and being a writer and therefore lazy, I reached for the closest thing at hand, which was me. And so I filled the Crypt Keeper with me. And so it looks like Kevin's puppet. It sounds like John's voice, but every thought he had, every word out of his mouth was me.
Hi, I'm G.D. Fenderson, certified forensic humorist and host of Done Way Past Funny. Thank you for watching our continuing interview with Alan Katz. And please come back to watch more of our interview with Alan Katz. And when you come back to join us, bring a friend.